The West Coast Trail is a 75-kilometer backpacking route on Vancouver Island that is known for its unique terrain and cable cars and ladders. However, this was logistically one of the most complicated backpacking trips I've ever been on, and also the most expensive I've ever been on, and I've done the W Trek in Patagonia, which I thought was expensive down there. In this video, we will cover everything you need to know in order to do the West Coast Trail, including the permits, all the fees, the ferries, the shuttles, all the gear that you need, and what to expect when you're on the trail. There are chapters and timestamps down below, so click on those to jump to the chapter that you want to learn more about. So let's start with actually getting your permits to do the West Coast Trail. In early February, Parks Canada opens up a time slot for all of the backpacking permits to be released. And it is a first come, first serve system. So you need to go on the Parks Canada website to see what that date is and jump on right at the time that they say that the reservations are available. And I also recommend to create your Parks Canada account beforehand so you don't have to try to mess with that when you're trying to grab those reservations. Now this year, the reservations opened February 8th, and right on the time that they were available, I jumped on and I was already 12,000th in line. So I was not able to get the permits, but luckily I had someone else that was able to get through. So you have to be on it. You have to be ready to go right at that time. Once you get your permit, that permit gets you your starting date and your ending date, and that's it. The trail is a free-for-all. All the campsites and everything are a first come, first serve basis. So you're able to create your own route. You can decide you're going to go to this camp on this day, and the next day you're going to go to this camp, etc. You just have to hope that there's actually sites there, which we never ran into that problem, but also we didn't go during the busiest time of year. So I could see in midsummer it being a lot more difficult to get campsites. So with your reservation, there comes a lot of fees, an outrageous amount of fees. So let me label them off for you. You have an orientation fee. You have your West Coast Trail backcountry use permit. You have your Gordon River ferry. You have your Nit-Nat Narrows ferry. You have your national park entry fee. You have a reservation fee per group. And all of that this year in 2026 added up to about $310 per person just for the fees to get onto the trail. So then on top of all those fees, if you're trying to go from end to end, south to north or north to south, you're probably going to need to get back to your car at some point, and there is a shuttle for that. And the shuttle is $95 per person one way, or $180 round trip per person. And then on top of that, to get over to Vancouver Island, you have to take a ferry, and those are about $200 per carload of people. And then on top of that, in order to leave your car at a trailhead, you also have to pay parking fees on top of all that. So you're looking at just in fees around $500 or so per person to do this trail. So that doesn't include any food, that doesn't include any of your gear, nothing. So just to get going, you're looking at $500. And then after that, all the other costs are just based off of what you already have available. So speaking of shuttle, let's talk about the shuttle a little bit. There is a shuttle that goes from Victoria to the south end and the north end and the middle of the West Coast Trail. So you are able to jump on that shuttle to take it to where you need. However, the times aren't that convenient, but at least you have that as an option. So what I mean by it's not that convenient. The Gordon River drop-off is at 9:15 a.m. or 5:15 p.m. The Pachena Bay drop-off and pickup is 12:30 p.m. and 1:45 p.m. And at the Nit-Nat midway point, if you're going northbound, then you could get picked up there around 11:45 a.m. And if you're going southbound, you could get picked up around 2:25 p.m. So you do have to plan either your final day or your first day on the trail around those times of when you could get picked up or dropped off. Now, going back to fees. Let's say your plan is to do the entire route, but someone in your group decides that they want to bail out at Nit-Nat. That is an option. However, it's not the most convenient option. The ferry at Nit-Nat to take you over to their village to jump on the shuttle is $75 per person. They will take you over around 6 p.m. at night. Unfortunately, the shuttle goes through at 2:25 p.m., which means you miss the shuttle if you're taking that ferry back. They will do a special ferry for you to make sure that you get onto that shuttle. And that ferry costs $250 plus $75 per person to make sure that you are able to get to that shuttle. There's a catch. When you get to the village, You then have to pay somebody $20 per person to drive you from the ferry up to the bus stop to catch the shuttle. So try to plan as best you can to make sure that you do not have to bail out halfway through if you don't want to pay those types of fees. They know what they have there, and they know that you have no other options, and they will take advantage of that. I will have a link down in the description for the West Coast Trail bus so that you can see their schedule and see all the costs and whatnot for that. So the timing of stuff is not very convenient for the way that we usually like to backpack. So for instance, we had to check in for our reservation at 9 a.m. on the south end of the trail. The check-in took 5 minutes, so we were done with that by 9:05. And then there's a required orientation we had to wait around for that started at 10, and then that lasted 30 minutes, and then we went immediately from that onto our ferry to get across the Gordon River at 10:30, and we didn't get started until about 11. The unfortunate thing is during the orientation, they tell you all these apps and websites that you should download or have on your phone to check the weather and the tides and the trail conditions and all that stuff, but you don't have time between the orientation and the ferry to make that happen. So I wish they would have bumped the orientation time a lot closer to your reservation time so that you would have time to actually go through and utilize all those resources, but you know, that's just how they do things over there. And then on the north end, if you want to catch the shuttle back to the south end, you had to be done with your day by the middle of the day in order to make that ferry. Otherwise, you had to wait until the middle of the next day to get back. Now, along the trail, there are 2 different food options. So you could get a nice hot meal. You have the Crab Shack, which is the halfway point, and you have the Burger Shack. The Burger Shack is very unreliable. I would not plan on that being a meal because you never know if they're going to be open or not. It takes more effort for them to bring in food to the Burger Shack, therefore they're not open as often. The Crab Shack is always open, and they run it like a business. They do a really good job. For a full breakfast there, it's about $25, and if you want the full crab meal, it was around $90. They also have tons of snacks and baked goods and all that type of stuff for about $5, and what's really cool is if it's a very rainy day, they have a nice fireplace inside, and so you can dry off and heat up and whatnot there as well. They also have some covered tent sites, and they have some little cabin things as well. So you can always pay for those if you want to get out of the rain. If we had known they had covered tent sites, we probably would have stayed there to get out of the dumping rain so all of our stuff wouldn't have been wet, but it dried out pretty quick. We got pretty lucky on that. So let's talk about route planning. It's hard to know how well you will do on this trail if you've never experienced PNW-like conditions before. There's a lot of mud pits, a lot of wet logs, wet roots, wet bridges, all that type of stuff. So if that's stuff you are not used to, I would definitely make sure to plan shorter days because all of that stuff requires a lot more balance and technical hiking to be able to stay up on your feet. And it slows you down, especially with all the ladders. There's over 100 ladders on the trail. That slows you way down compared to normal hiking on a trail. Now for our group, we're all pretty fast hikers and we were maintaining about 2 miles per hour throughout the entire trip, but it's hard to do with those type of conditions as well. And we were going slower in the wet rainy day because of how slick everything was. There is a West Coast Trail app that you can download. I believe it's like $30, but it does tell you section by section how difficult it is and best ways through it and how to plan for them. So we had one person in the group that had that app and they loved it. So that's something that's probably worth having with you just so you can plan ahead and know, okay, from this campsite to this campsite is X amount of kilometers and it is rated hard. So then you can plan accordingly. That app also gives you a lot of like little history stuff and whatnot and tells you different things along the trail to see, such as old logging equipment, shipwrecks, and all that type of stuff. So now let's talk about gear. First, you are in a rainforest, so let's talk about that rain gear. Now you can bring your standard rain jacket and rain pants if you want, but do remember that this is a very humid environment and it's not the coldest environment ever either. So there is a good chance that you're going to create a lot of body heat inside of your rain suit, which will just cause you to sweat and you're going to be probably equally as wet on the inside as you are on the outside. Now, every person's internal temps are going to be a little different, but that does happen pretty often because a lot of those rain suits just don't provide much ventilation to get your body heat away from you. So keep that in mind for those big rainy days, that there is a good chance you're going to be sweating a lot. Now, what I did different on this trip is I brought a poncho, which I'm very glad I did. The poncho is looser on your body. There's more space inside of the poncho, and so there's more area for your body heat to release. And I actually didn't overheat, which I am someone that runs very warm, and typical rain gear makes me sweat like crazy. So a poncho was an amazing option. And I got a nice big poncho on Amazon for like 20 bucks that goes all the way over my backpack and down to my knees and protected me almost all the way. Like my hands got wet, and that's about it. So I do recommend trying a poncho out if you've never used a poncho before. That was my first time, and I was very impressed with how well it worked. Now, tents. There's lots of tent options out there. I used a trekking pole tent, a Durson X-Mid Pro 2. Everybody else in the group used freestanding tents. You are spending a lot of time on the beaches, and I do think freestanding tent is your better option, because it's just really hard to use trekking pole tents in the sand. It's hard to get a good pitch, especially if there's nasty weather. It's doable, but it's difficult to do. But you do want a tent that will protect you from rain. So it needs to be waterproof, and also it needs to be able to handle winds to a degree. You are on the coast, you are going to get those winds that come off of the coast and into your camp. So make sure you have a tent that can handle that, or at least you have a lot of guy lines that you can use to stretch the tent out and make it more taut. I also recommend going through your tent and patching any holes that you have to keep the water out. Otherwise, if you do have a big downpour that comes in, you are going to be very sad. Trust me, I know. All right, the big shoe debate. Do you wear boots or do you wear shoes? I opted to wear running shoes. Everybody else in my group wore waterproof boots. Both have pros, both have cons. So we'll start with the boots. The boots will do a better job at keeping your feet dry until you get the boots wet on the inside. Once the boots get wet on the inside, it is game over. Your feet will be wet the rest of the time. You will not dry out those boots. But the boots also provide nice ankle stability. And if you're not used to really rooty, nasty trails and mud and all that type of stuff, then that ankle stability could be really good to make sure you don't roll an ankle. The boots also give you a higher lip so you can walk through a lot of those mud pits and stuff better and not get the mud down into your socks and messing up your feet. Running shoes, on the other hand, breathe a lot better. You will get them wet a lot faster, but they also dry out a lot faster. There's more airflow, so it's a little better for your feet as long as you have a chance to dry them out. There's less ankle stability, but if you're used to running shoes and you're used to that type of terrain, then I think you have a lot more control going over that type of stuff because you're able to move with your feet through the roots and be able to control your body a lot better. You're not in a stiff boot that if it starts going one way, you're going with it. I tried for a day and a half to keep my feet as dry as possible, and then I got to a point where I dunked one foot, and that was the end for me. I just started walking through everything, and I stopped caring about whether they were going to be wet or not because it was over. But I do have to say, everybody's feet got wet on this trip. It didn't matter if you had shoes or boots. It was just a matter of time, and everyone got blisters at the end of it too. So pick your poison on that one. What is going to be the best option for you? Trekking poles, highly recommend. They are fantastic for balance, especially on all those wet roots and stuff. It gives you 2 more points on the ground to help keep you upright and stable. You can also use it to test the depth of the mud that you're trying to walk through to see what is the best path through so you don't sink up to your knee in mud. And there are some little creek crossings and whatnot that it also helps to use those to keep you stable so you don't accidentally get your feet washed out from underneath you and soaking your entire body. So I highly, highly, highly recommend having trekking poles with you. All right, blister care. I do recommend bringing some sort of chafing stick or something to protect your feet. You can get that in there before the start of the day. Try to rub in as much of that as possible on your feet and around your toes to try to reduce friction between your feet and your socks to reduce the chances of blisters. But if your feet are wet the entire time, you will develop blisters eventually, especially if you are doing longer days and you're spending more time on your feet. It's going to happen. If you have shorter days, then you're less likely to develop those blisters because you can be at camp and dry your feet out and wear more comfortable and dry stuff. So chafing sticks work really good. I'm also trying to develop a chafing stick that works really well in wetter conditions, so I will have a link to that on my website if you want to try that out. Also bring moleskin for when you do get the blisters. It just provides a little tougher layer between your foot and your sock and your shoes so that you don't make the blisters worse. I personally go through it and I pop my blisters at the end of the day so that it has time to toughen up overnight, and that seems to work really well for me. You know your own feet, so you can try that, or you could leave the big bulbous blister if you want and take care of that at the end of the trip. That is completely up to you. Also, I highly recommend getting specialized socks to reduce friction for blisters. Injinji toe socks is an option. Bottega running socks is also a really good option. If you look for like trail running or ultra running socks and look at what people are using for those are really good options for wet, nasty feet and for spending time on your feet to reduce your blisters. Most of those socks have a way to reduce the friction between your toes or on your feet and reduce all those hot spots. So I recommend getting socks for that. So the water sources overall are pretty good on this trail. There's lots of little creeks and little streams and whatnot that you can fill up. Most campsites also have something nearby that you can fill up water. You do want to make sure you bring a filter. You don't know what is upstream. There's lots of animals and whatnot in the area, and you don't want to just try and drink straight from the streams and get yourself sick. So bring some sort of filter. I tend to prefer using the Katadyn Be-Free filter or something similar to that. They flow really easily. You can filter a whole liter of water in less than 30 seconds. So it's simple, it's quick, and it gets the job done. The other thing with the water sources, though, is you need to pay attention to where the water line is from the ocean and the seawater into the stream or the river. That type of water is called brackish water, where you're mixing seawater in with the fresh water, and you want to be above that brackish line. Otherwise, you are going to be drinking seawater, and that's not going to be good for you. So we did see a lot of people not paying attention to that line, and they're filling up their water where the seawater is mixing in. I literally watched waves from the ocean come in right to where this one person was filling up, and I'm like, just walk further up the river and you'll be fine. To each their own. So pay attention to that. Over at the Darling River Camp, the ocean goes way up that river, so you have to go quite a ways up to get above that brackish line, just so that you know. You can take a note on that one. Most of the rest of them, you don't have to go up too far because there is a little elevation and you can kind of see where that line is. And finally, food. That all depends on how long you plan to be out on the trail. But what I usually do is I look at how many days we're going to be out there. I look at how many dinners I'm going to need, which are typically freeze-dried dinners. And then I usually don't wake up and have breakfast. I will have like a protein bar. So then I set aside protein bars in the morning to consume right before we get started. And then I think about the snacks that I need throughout the day to give me energy to get to my next campsite. And then on top of that, I always add in a couple little snacks that make me excited to get to camp, and I can have those snacks. So that's how I usually plan stuff out, is I look at my big meals and then I fill in the rest with snacks and protein stuff to help with recovery each and every single day. Food can add up in weight very quickly, and I'm sure you'll find that some of your favorite foods probably weigh a lot, and then you have to assess whether it's worth having that and having to carry that or not. And also remember that you can get a meal at the Crab Shack, so make sure to factor that in as well. So that should be all the information you need to successfully do the West Coast Trail. If you do have any questions, make sure to drop them down in the comments, and I will get back to you right away and help you out with that. It is a very fun trail, even though it's expensive, logistically complex, but it is very fun, and it was a great time. So I recommend doing it for sure if you get the chance. Just make sure you look at the date that those reservations open up, and you jump on that right away. So if this video was helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next video.